La Llorona, also known as the Crying Woman or the Wailer, is a Latin mythical vengeful ghost. Wikipedia says Mexican, but I don't know if that's actually where it originated. She is said to roam near bodies of water mourning her children, whom she drowned in a jealous rage after discovering her husband was cheating on her. Now, I am not Latin or Hispanic or anything like that. I am white. The ancestry I have that I know of is German, Irish, Scottish, and some other stuff I don't remember. So like that part of the world. So I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective. So if you don't trust an outsider's perspective, then take anything I say with a grain of salt. Now, I'm not actually going to be looking at the myth today, as the title of this video will probably clue you in. I'm counting down my top 10 movies based on La Llorona. I'm just going to put out a spoiler alert, although I will try to avoid spoilers on the ones that I would actually recommend you watch. So, the more I hate the movie, the more I'm going to spoil it. Let's just go with that. Some of these movies were actually Latin productions, so I apologize in advance if I butcher any names. Starting off near the bottom of the barrel. My number 10 is The Haunting of La Llorona. When it comes to low-budget movies like this, I try to adjust my expectations accordingly. Just because a movie has no money behind it doesn't mean it's doomed to be awful. Just look at the original Evil Dead. Wait, what? What? You cannot be serious. Forget that. This movie apparently had a budget of $500,000. It looks like it had a budget of about $5,000. I also try to give some leeway to movies like this if they're made by directors who have little to no directing experience, but that's also not the case here, because this dude has 32 directing credits listed on Letterboxd and 36 on IMDb. His filmography starts all the way back with 1989's Fatal Images and includes classic films like Camp Blood 8 Revelations. This dude had been in the film industry for at least 30 years when he made this movie, so he has no excuse. There's no creativity in the filmmaking, just the same old basic techniques you learn in film school, either being applied in a sloppy and amateur way, or just being forgotten. This movie is 71 minutes long, making it the shortest movie on this list, and it still feels bloated with all the padding shoved in. There are multiple times where the lead actress goes out for a run, and every single time they use the same in-your-face, intense horror music that just feels very out of place. And also, she runs really weird. Are we sure this movie wasn't secretly directed by James Wen? Hi! Where this movie fails the most is its depiction of the Weeping Woman. It botches La Llorona even worse than the Conjuring version did, and basically turns her into a generic ghost/demon thing capable of possessing people. Now that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Artistic license exists for a reason, and when used properly can actually improve a film. That is not the case here. There is nothing artistic about this license. There's nothing in the movie that actually justifies the change. Then again, there's nothing in the movie that really justifies the inclusion of La Llorona in place of just any old ghost or demon, so... La Llorona also has green face paint for some reason, and it just looks ridiculous. Like, that poster is a lie. I wish she looked that good. And as if that's not bad enough, when the protagonist is expositing about, telling the story of La Llorona, she says that La Llorona killed herself, and then he, her husband, killed the kids.
So, La Llorona was a woman who had a husband that traveled. He fell out of love with her and then found a new woman. So she killed herself and then killed her kids. So she's stuck in limbo.
So either the lead actress flubbed her line and nobody noticed or cared, or the writers just flubbed their research. Honestly, given the rest of the movie, either one is entirely possible. The nicest thing I can say about this movie is that the lead actress and the dude playing her boyfriend at least have some decent chemistry.
Whoa! Nice to see you too.
When did you get home? I didn't hear you coming in.
I got home late last night. You were asleep. I don't want to bother you, so I slept on the couch. I'm gonna go ahead and take this out of your way. All right.
Sorry.
It's nice to see you. Thought you'd be a little bit happier to see me.
I am. I'm just stressed, okay? I'm so sick of your job.
Yeah.
You're never home.
I know, it sucks. I get it.
It does.
But hey, as soon as I'm owner-operator, I can pick and choose my own hours and I can come and go as I please. It'll be all right, okay?
Like, he is the best character in this movie, and so naturally he's killed off way too soon. My score is 1 out of 5. Number 9 is The Return of La Llorona. Unlike Haunting, I'm actually going to cut this movie a little slack, because it was the director's first movie and currently her only credit on IMDb. The writer at least had some previous experience, though. And in spite of having a less experienced director, this movie is actually a step above Haunting. That's not saying much, but you know, it's something. Like, it's more competently made, the acting and writing are slightly better. The characters get about the same amount of depth and development, which is to say very little, but there are more of them, and they all have that level of depth and development, so like, if you add it all up, I guess that's more total depth? I don't know. However the hell that works. La Llorona is barely in this movie after the opening scene, and she's not even remotely scary. But at least her portrayal is more faithful to the myth, probably because this is a Honduran production, and not an American one. Yeah, there's really never been a good American version of this story, as you'll come to see. This movie's main problem is the characters. I mean, they all have at least a little depth, but they just suck. Let's see, we have 3 men and 3 women. 2 of the men are dating 2 of the women. I don't know if the third pair is actually dating each other or not. I don't remember. This movie's not very memorable, and probably the only reason I remember any of it is that actually I have a good memory for movies. The 3 men are all either directly responsible for or accomplices in the sexual assault and manslaughter of an innocent woman, and the 3 women are just along for the ride and forced to watch their asshole boy toys get picked off by La Llorona. I mean, the female characters at least have a little agency, but like, they don't really have much to do because they're not being targeted. So all they can really do is sit around and try to help their asshole boyfriends, which is ultimately in vain.
No debemos de haber hecho lo que hicimos.
¿Quién está al lado de Martín? Ella tuvo a su esposo, se volvió loco, ya lo demás es historia.
¿Ella quién?
La Llorona.
My score is 1.5 out of 5. Number 8 is The Curse of La Llorona. This was the feature directorial debut of Michael Chavez, but he directed other stuff before it, like 11 episodes of some show called Chase Champion and the music video for Bury a Friend by Billie Eilish?
Say it, spit it out. What is it exactly? Your pain is the amount cleaning you out. Am I satisfactory? Today I'm thinking about the things that are deadly. The way I'm drinking you down, like I wanna drown, like I wanna end me.
How is it that this man's greatest directorial accomplishment is a music video? This movie at least tries to bring the myth to life, but ultimately it just rings hollow. It does not delve very deep into the rich potential of La Llorona, and ultimately it just comes off as another ghost story, albeit a somewhat competently made one. The cast turned in decent enough performances, but the writing is mediocre at best and garbage at worst. Director Michael Chavez and cinematographer Michael Burgess do a decent job of creating a creepy atmosphere. Unfortunately, their efforts are mostly in vain because the creepy atmosphere they do create is constantly undercut by all the jump scares. I think that this is a better movie than The Nun, but at least The Nun had one good jump scare. I honestly don't think this one has any. They at least work some aspects of La Llorona's story into the plot, They try to have a kind of sympathetic portrayal of her, but then they kind of just shoot themselves in the foot by having her be this enemy that must be defeated rather than someone who to be helped, if that makes sense. Basically, like, she comes off mostly as a generic movie ghost.
Behold the cross of the Lord, and be gone wicked friend!
The one thing I actually love about this movie is that it seems to follow my personal preference for the portrayal of a priest's ability to bless water and turn that into holy water. Basically, my preferred portrayal of a priest in fiction is that their ability to bless water is limited by their vision. If they can see the entire body of water, they can bless the entire body of water. And in this movie, Raphael blesses an entire decent-sized swimming pool. My score is 2 out of 5. Number 7 is The Legend of La Llorona. This one isn't getting any leeway for inexperience. It was the director's feature film debut, but she had also directed episodes of several TV shows that I've never heard of, so I'll cut her a little bit of slack because it was her first movie, but only a little bit. Despite its obviously low budget, this movie actually had the potential to be basically just better than Curse in every way, but then it somehow managed to have a climax that's even worse. Like, I still think it's better as a whole, or, okay, not so much better as just less bad. They actually had the characters find a way to get La Llorona off her backs without having to defeat her like she is some sort of evil demon. I think is they have to give her the body of her daughter or something like that because she can't find it. But then they fuck that all up. Well, okay, the characters fuck it up by giving her the wrong body, and so then they are forced to defeat her like as she is some sort of evil demon. You were this close. It's a shame because there is an emotional story in here somewhere. It's just buried under a weak script, mostly bland acting, and a laughably bad special effects.
Danny.
Something wrapped around his leg!
Rip at it!
Get out! Now, go, Andrew!
It's just weeds.
No. There was somebody
Where?
down there.
Where?
Somebody grabbed my arm.
Come on, honey, please. Oh. You know, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the doctor made me, I promise, I'd do it. I'm telling you. Have you taken your meds today?
Honestly, the only actors who are actually giving good performances are Autumn Reeser and Danny Trejo. This movie is about a married couple and their young son who are vacationing in Mexico for some reason. Mom and dad are... Mom is still trying to get over a miscarriage. Dad is one of the most toxic husband characters I've ever seen in a movie. And son is too young to fully understand what's going on. So, yeah, there was a lot of potential there, but the execution was just lackluster. Also, the jump scares are just as bad as the ones in Curse. The Curse of La Llorona is actually more competent than this movie is from a technical standpoint, for whatever that's worth. I rank this one higher because it's more inoffensive. Like, Curse has the higher highs, but it also has the lower lows, and those lows are, like, offensively bad. The only part of this movie that's, like, offensively bad is the climax, which I already mentioned. Other than that, it's just bad, but not offensively so. Because I don't care about spoiling this one, I will give them props for not killing off Danny Trejo, because every second he's on screen, the movie's watchability doubled. My score is 2 out of 5. Number 6 is The Wailer. I will cut this one a little slack since it was the director's feature debut. Story-wise, The Wailer is a standard low-budget mid-2000s horror flick. It's also a fairly decent portrayal of La Llorona. The characters are mostly unlikable, but not nearly as annoying as I was expecting. Like, most of them are actually tolerable. Damned by faint praise, I know. This movie falls back on a lot of established tropes and cliches. The only real surprise came at the end, and admittedly, it was a good one. The rest of it was fairly predictable. The acting is passable, the directing and cinematography are adequate, the editing is pretty good, the music is decent but not all that memorable. I do not remember any of the characters' names, I don't remember any dialogue from this movie, but I do remember a decent amount of the visuals, so at least part of it was memorable. You know, there are actually some really good visuals in this movie, so well done.
Jake, abre la puerta.
Chicos, me están espantando.
Muy bien, vamos a entrar. ¡Oh, Dios! ¡Maldición! ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó?
The depiction of La Llorona is fairly creepy, but unfortunately she still has 1 foot in generic movie ghost territory. My score is 2.5 out of 5. Number 5 is The Wailer 2. This movie is a direct sequel to the first Wailer. It's not one of those sequels that's basically just standalone and has a few references to the first movie thrown in purely for brand recognition. This one actually continues the story of the first movie. They do that by having the father of one of the college students from the first movie come to Mexico looking for his daughter, who was the one who got possessed by La Llorona at the end of that movie. Oh, and since I didn't mention it, that part was actually the one thing that surprised me in that movie. That was actually a decent surprise. Anyway, unfortunately, she was recast, so whatever minimal emotional attachment I had to her from the first movie is gone. So instead of having even just a small emotional connection to actually build upon, now they're back to square one, and they have to establish something new. And they do that, but like, why not just get the same actress back? This movie is a step up from its predecessor in basically every way. Actually, really the only way it's not an improvement is the music, and even that's not worse, it's just on par. It's still not great, but like, it's actually good. The acting, writing, cinematography, and editing are all better. Now, like in the first movie, the depiction of La Llorona strays a little bit from the myth, actually in a similar way to the Haunting of La Llorona, where she's able to possess people. The difference is that in the first Wailer, and even more so in this movie, it's actually kind of creepy. Okay, so the change in her behavior in this movie with her going after certain men is a departure from the myth. However, it also makes sense given the changes to her backstory that we saw in the beginning of the first movie. So although that bit strays from the myth, it's actually in character for this version of La Llorona. Like, they actually maintained continuity in that regard. So I will give them that.
Legend says that evil haunts the river where she drowned her children for the love of an undeserving man. Now it searches the dark regions and black recesses of the damned, possessing the doomed. They say she wanders in the dark, crying for her lost children. They say if you see her, run.
This movie is also just less generic than the first one. It does a better job of keeping me guessing. There's still a bunch of stuff I saw coming, but there were actually several surprises instead of just one. For example, there's one character I expected to die who survived, and another character I expected to survive who died. So, well done. My score is 3 out of 5. Number 4 is The Vengeance of the Crying Woman, alternatively known as Santo and Montequia in The Vengeance of La Llorona. Basically, Santo, or I think El Santo as he's known, is Mexican wrestler Batman. No, seriously. He was played by the real-life wrestler El Santo, and between the 1950s and the 1970s, he played the character in 52 different movies. No, I'm not kidding. And during that time, he fought all sorts of bad guys like an evil brain, a Martian invasion, Dracula himself, and the King of Crime. Alright. It is one of 2 movies from the franchise I have seen. The other one is the one that MST3K covered, where he fights Dracula. Anyway, so in this movie, Santo is going after a gold medallion that was buried with La Llorona. Or entombed with her. I don't know. No, I think technically it was entombed with her, because, like, she's in an above-ground tomb, not, like, an in-ground grave. So, he's going after a gold medallion that was entombed with La Llorona.
That same night, Miss Eugenio Esparza poisoned her 3 children, and then herself. Since it was suicide, the church denied her proper burial, and her body lies in a cavern.
This concludes today's grammar lesson. They stay reasonably faithful to the myth, but Zeus have mercy, the makeup effects they use for La Llorona are cheap as shit. I realized it was the 70s, so makeup wasn't as advanced as it is now. That technology was much more limited. But even still, I highly doubt if anyone who saw this movie was actually scared by her. Now, this is a Santo movie, which means there's lots of exposition and as you know dialogue. Like, a lot of it.
I insist on my previous and much repeated opinion that we should eliminate my eminent colleague and his 2 helpers inside of that cavern, which will allow us, without any more problems, to seize the medallion.
You may have your opinion, but I have orders and I will carry them out.
But it's also a fun and campy action flick with a bit of horror mixed in. The ending was pretty anticlimactic, but it's still better than some of the endings of the movies I've already covered, so, you know, there's that. My score is 3 out of 5. Number 3 is the oldest movie on this list, The Crying Woman from 1933. This movie has the distinction of being Mexico's first horror movie, or at least their first horror movie with sound. I don't know if they hadn't made any silent films that were horror. But regardless, it's wild how similar it feels to the Universal horror movies of the era. Like, you can tell it's not Universal, but it has like a very similar vibe. So the story follows a family who's being tormented by La Llorona, and at one point we get a decently long flashback telling her backstory. It's probably the most faithful retelling of the La Llorona myth in any of these movies. It doesn't change any pre-existing elements, it just expands on some of them. Various countries have different versions of the La Llorona myth. Mexico, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and all the others I can't remember off the top of my head. They all have more or less the same story, but like each version is just slightly different. Generally, in the myth, it is only established that her husband is cheating on her. In the backstory in this movie, it's established that not only is he cheating on her, he is planning to leave her for his mistress and take the kids away from her. Giving her even more motivation to have a Luke Skywalker Last Jedi moment.
He would bring destruction and pain and death at the end of everything I love because of what he will become. And for the briefest moment of pure instinct, I thought I could stop it. It passed like a fleeting shadow, and I was left with shame.
Although, unlike him, she actually goes through with it.
Ahí va su sangre con la mía.
The acting here is pretty good for the time. The cinematography and set design are on par with what Universal was putting out at the time. The editing is nothing extraordinary, but still very good. They use some superimposed special effects to represent the ghost, and they're not flawless, but they hold up surprisingly well to the point that they actually look better than the effects in The Legend of La Llorona. Honestly, I don't even know how that's possible, but there it is. The pacing isn't great, but the movie has this nice gothic atmosphere that really adds to the experience. My score is 3 out of 5. Number 2 is The Legend of La Llorona. No, not that one. I already covered that one. That's the one. Like the Santo movie, this one is actually part of a series, in this case a franchise of Mexican animated horror comedies aimed at kids called Legend Quest or Las Leyendas. The franchise consists of 6 movies and I think 1 season of a TV show. And it follows a ragtag group of misfits, which includes Leo San Juan, a heroic preteen boy who can communicate with ghosts and monsters, Teodora, a sassy preteen ghost with a know-it-all personality, Don Andres, I really hope I said that right, an amicable but loony old knight, Alejibre, a mild-mannered mythical creature that kinda looks like an Eastern dragon fucked the living embodiment of a Day of the Dead festival, and Finado and Moribunda, 2 silent Calavera children. It all takes place in the early 1800s, and each movie and episode of the show is based on a different Mexican legend. Also, apparently film franchises aren't very common in Mexican cinema, which is probably part of the reason this one has become very popular and profitable. This is the second movie in the series, so I'm guessing I missed all the character introductions and whatnot in the first movie, but they all have pretty distinct personalities, so they succeeded in that regard. Overall, this is a fun animated flick. Because it's aimed at a younger audience, they made some changes to La Llorona's backstory to tone it down, so now instead of her drowning her own kids, she was trying to take them to safety, and she got out of the boat to go make sure the house is okay, and the boat floated away, and the kids drowned.
Yolsin. Ese era su nombre. Cuenta la leyenda que hace muchos años llegó a Xochimilco con sus 2 hijos, Olin y Tonatiu. Como era una mujer sola, tenía que trabajar muy duro vendiendo las flores que ella cultivaba en su chinampa. Su generosidad y camaradería hacia los demás la hizo ganarse la simpatía de Xochimilco. Y su humilde chinampa pronto comenzó a dar frutos. Hasta que en una mala noche, todo cambió. En un descuido, la casa de Yolsin prendió fuego justo cuando regresaba de una larga jornada de trabajo. Desesperada, Yolsin trató de apagar el incendio, sin darse cuenta que la barca en donde estaban sus hijos quedaba a la deriva. Cuando notó la ausencia, era demasiado tarde. No quedaba rastro de ellos.
So instead of it being murder, it was just not even manslaughter. It was like straight up an accident.
Because accident implies there's nobody to blame.
And unlike some of the other movies on this list, in this case, the changes are actually kind of justified because, like I said, these movies are mostly aimed at kids. The animation is great, the voice acting is solid, and the humor actually works more often than not. This movie is 81 minutes long, which is actually longer than lower-ranked movies like Haunting and Return, but the pacing is so much better that it actually feels shorter. Also, at least partly because this is a kids' movie, they actually treat La Llorona as someone to be pitied and helped, instead of a sympathetic but evil spirit who must be defeated/destroyed. Imagine that. And I mean, don't get me wrong, she crossed a line when she drowned her children. No matter how bad she feels about it, she still crossed a line. But, out of all the movies so far, this is easily the most sympathetic depiction of La Llorona. My score is 3.5 out of 5. Finally, my number 1 is the Guatemalan film simply titled La Llorona. Quick history lesson. Between 1981 and 1983, the US-backed Guatemalan government committed what is known as the Maya Genocide or Silent Holocaust, a large-scale massacre of the native Maya population. It was part of a civil war which lasted from 1960 to 96, and as an American, I would just like to apologize on behalf of my former government. Anyway, so former Guatemalan dictator and military general Efren Rios Montt, I hope I pronounced that correctly, was indicted for his role in the most intense stage of the genocide. He was convicted in 2013, but the sentence was overturned, and he died in 2018 before his retrial could be completed. It was said by some that karma got him. That is where this movie comes in. It's horror, but it's also like political thriller. Our villain protagonist is former Guatemalan dictator Enrique Monteverde, based on the real dude, and he is tormented by our hero antagonist La Llorona. We start with Enrique being found guilty of genocide, but then that verdict is overturned because apparently there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove that he was directly responsible. At home, Enrique hears a woman crying, and being a paranoid old man, apparently in the early stages of Alzheimer's, he grabs one of his guns to go check it out, only to end up shooting at and almost hitting his wife. Most of the household staff quits shortly thereafter, and then one new arrival is hired, Alma.
Nos exponga, por favor.
Águila, Golfo en 12, verifique perímetro 4.
This movie doesn't bother trying to hide the fact that Alma is La Llorona. In fact, in some ways, it counts on its native audience's familiarity with the legend in order to subvert expectations. Oh no, she's drowning Sarah, just like she did her kids. Wait, no, she's just helping Sarah practice holding her breath. Bet that'll come in handy later. And so from there, she torments the general, and I won't spoil what happens because I actually highly recommend you watch this movie and I don't want to give it away. This movie is 97 minutes long, making it the second longest movie on this list. But, like, it doesn't feel like the second longest movie on this list, because the pacing is spot on. This is a slow burn done right. My one complaint with this movie is that the payoff to all the build-up isn't quite as satisfying as it could have been, but it's still very satisfying. So, like, there was a little room for improvement, but still great. Maria Mercedes Coroy delivers a perfectly understated performance as Alma / La Llorona. It's almost a dual role, since Alma is the seemingly reserved and, like, mild-mannered persona that comes out during the day, and then La Llorona comes out at night to torment Enrique. During one of his paranoid nighttime searches, he spots her coming in from the pool and follows her into the bathroom, where he sees her sitting on the edge of the bathtub completely naked and washing her dress. She sees him watching, but does nothing. And only when Enrique's wife walks in does La Llorona slip back into the Alma persona and be like, "Oh my god, what? Oh my god, he's being a pervert. He's staring at me." That's not actually what she said. It was just something to that effect. This movie is the entire reason I made this list in the first place. It's the reason I've watched any of the other La Llorona movies, excluding Curse, because I watched that one before I watched this one, because it was a new Conjuring movie and I wanted to see how bad it was. This movie is well-crafted, atmospheric, and actually genuinely scary. Director Jairo Bustamante went out of his way to avoid jump scares and instead used, like, slow zooms and long uncut shots. And it's so good. And part of that was due to budget limitations. Like, at one point, Enrique is being brought home from the hospital. We see the drive, or at least, like, part of the drive up to the house, and then they get out of the ambulance and they wheel his gurney into the house. The whole thing has no cuts, and it starts inside of the ambulance as we hear them driving through protesters, and then we follow them as they get out of the ambulance and go inside the house. And only when they're inside the house do they actually cut. Part of the reason this movie works so well is that it's not just trying to scare you, it's more than just horror. The director said that this is one of 3 movies he's made where he was trying to address, like, the 3 big fears that Guatemalan people genuinely have. I'm not going to tell you what those are, because you should just get a copy of the movie and watch it yourself. This movie is the story of an old man stubbornly refusing to own up to his sins. It's the story of a loving and supportive wife finally starting to realize and accept that these accusations against her husband actually aren't bullshit. It's the story of their adult daughter trying to distance herself from her father's influence and also trying to keep her daughter out of harm's way while this angry mob endlessly protests outside their big-ass house. It's the story of another mother, this one who lost everything and has returned to punish those responsible. My score is 4.5 out of 5. Hey everyone, which of these movies have you seen? What did you think of them? Do you agree with my ranking, or would you rank them differently? Did you actually like Curse, or do you have good taste? Let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe and all that. If you don't like the video, tell me why down in the comments. And then subscribe anyway, so you'll be notified when I upload a new video, and then you can either tell me why that one sucks, or maybe where I've improved, or both. I don't know, I'll take any feedback I can get. That's all for now. Stay safe in these crazy times.